big shoe companies know what I just said. They know it's true. They said straight to his face, oh yeah, this natural movement thing is real. We just can't do it though, because if we did, it would be admitting we've been lying for 50 years. Lying for 50 years.
Sheasby Podcast, check it out.
The Sheasby audio experience.
Train by day, Sheasby Podcast by night, all day.
My name is Steven Sashen. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Xero Shoes here at xeroshoes.eu. We make casual and performance boots, shoes, and sandals for pretty much everything you can think of based on the simple idea of letting your body do what's natural. I'm also a Masters All-American sprinter, so for men over 60, which I am, I'm one of the fastest guys in America. And let's see, what else can I say that's fun? My wife and I turned down a $400,000 offer from Kevin O'Leary on Shark Tank, the U.S. version of Dragon's Den, of course.
Yes.
And here we are.
Here we are. Yeah, you mentioned like letting your feet do the natural thing. Can you go into that a bit more and why a lot of shoes today are maybe not allowing that? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's start with some really simple ideas. And for anyone listening, see if you disagree with these. Stronger is better than weaker. Seems like it makes sense. If you have bones and joints, they're supposed to move. That's better than immobilizing them, like putting your arm in a cast. If you have nerve endings, you're supposed to feel things. That tells your brain what to do with the rest of your body or how to respond accordingly. Your posture, there's proper alignment, which is sort of, if you look at the way a skeleton naturally works, that's proper, and getting in the way of that can lead to compression or other problems with joints that are now forced to do things that they wouldn't do if they were properly aligned. That all seems pretty straightforward, yeah?
Yep.
So that's the fundamental premise of natural movement. And if we look at regular shoes, they get in the way of every bit of that. So first, I don't know why most shoes have this pointy toe box. That's not the way human feet are shaped. And if your feet do look like this, they're not supposed to. And it's only from shoving them into things that look like this. And there's evidence that putting your feet in something that squeezes your toes together can lead to bunions and other problems. Back to the, let's see, stronger is better than weaker. Well, if you want to be strong, you have to use something. If you're going to make your bicep strong, you do bicep curls. If you want to make it weak, you put it in a cast. Well, same with your feet. You have a quarter of the bones and joints of your whole body in your feet and ankles. But this shoe does not let your foot move. In fact, the place where it barely bends, that's not even a place where your foot bends. And arch support, same idea. I know people think they might need it, but the research shows that it's just like putting your foot in a cast, that your foot gets up to 17% weaker in as little as 12 weeks just from adding something that, quote, supports your arch instead of the muscles, ligaments, and tendons working. Feeling things. When you have this much foam or more, many modern shoes have twice as much, well, you can't feel anything. You have more nerve endings in the soles of your feet than anywhere but your fingertips and your lips. But how much can you feel through all that foam? And people will say, yeah, but I need that foam for cushioning. Well, there's two interesting things about that. One is if you have all that foam, your body tends to, or your brain tells your body to land harder because it's trying to get that feedback that it can't actually get. And I know that sounds crazy, but the research, and there's tons of it, shows exactly that. Not only the landing harder, but even if you don't land harder, cushioning doesn't reduce impact forces. What it does, this is a quick physics lesson, it spreads out the pressure so your foot doesn't feel the pressure, but the force is still going into your body, and it'll land at the weakest joint up the chain, your ankle, your knee, your hip, your back. I was going to say lastly, but it's not true. I mentioned proper posture. When you elevate your heel even a little bit, that messes with your posture, tips you forward, and then you have to accommodate that with your knees, your hips, and your back. Egads, what else can I say? That kind of covers most of it.
Yeah, that's quite a lot. Yeah. So, and then your shoes are like the opposite of that, right?
Yeah, we do the opposite of all that. So a wider foot-shaped toe box. You're not squeezing your toes together. Low to the ground for balance and agility. We don't mess with your posture by lifting up your heel or by keeping your toes pointed up in the air. The sole is designed to give you traction and protection, but also thin enough to give you that ground feeling that your brain is looking for to know how to effectively and enjoyably move the rest of your body. And we make our soles really durable. Most modern running shoes in particular, they say you need to replace them in 200 to 500 miles. The big thick shoes, even less time sometimes. We made our rubber designed so that we have a 5,000 mile sole warranty. And last but not least, our shoes are so lightweight. We've literally had people say they went to bed still wearing them because they forgot they had them on. That's the gist of how you make something that supports what your body does naturally than getting in the way. Now, some people might say, yeah, but it's modern technology. So, modern must be better. Technology must be better. These are big companies with big R&D departments. They must have figured it out. Well, if that were true, then the following statistic would not be true. Since the advent of the modern running shoe, I'll talk about that in particular, injury rates for runners have spiked. Prior to 1972-ish, almost no evidence there's no evidence in the research for looking for the cause and cure for running injuries, because it really just wasn't happening. Same thing on basketball courts. I mean, everywhere that people were using in the 60s and early 70s, thin, flat shoes mostly. But since the advent of the modern athletic shoe, 50% of runners, 80% of marathoners get injured every year. And that number hasn't changed in the last 50 years. In fact, Nike put out a study that they did. They paid for it, they designed it, but someone else did it, so they called it independent. This is about 3 years ago. And the study showed that comparing their best-selling running shoe to a new shoe they developed, the way they publicized the study was that the new shoe reduced injury rates by 52%, which is true, except if you look at the numbers, it's a little different. In their best-selling running shoe, in the 12-week study, over 30% of the people got injured. The new shoe, only 15% got injured.
12 weeks.
Yeah, in just 12 weeks. And injury rates don't stay flat over time. Over time, they increase. So what I know statistically is if 30% are getting injured within 12 weeks, that number is going to turn into 70 to 80% over the course of a year. If 15% are getting injured in 12 weeks, that's going to turn into 30 to 40% over the course of a year. How is that good? That's the best they could do after 50 years. And of course, well, but then it raises, of course, two interesting questions. One, if that shoe is so much better, why are you still selling the other one? Why aren't you making all the shoes like the one that just reduced, quote unquote, reduced injury by 52%? And the second question is, why did it reduce injury? Which is even more interesting to me, because what Nike said is they took out many of the protective features of the best-selling shoe. In other words, they made it more like ours, but not enough like ours.
Yeah, I like you touched on there, with like, strong is better than weak, right? And Mark Bell says like strength is never a weakness and weakness is never a strength, and it's absolutely true. Like, I don't know if I heard this from you or someone else, but it's like your foot is the support. Like,
yeah,
I think I've got it here. It's from what I found, 26 bones in your feet, over 100 muscles like tendons, ligaments.
Yeah,
and you've got like hundreds of thousands of nerve endings.
Yeah, and there's research from Dr. Sarah Ridge that showed that just walking in shoes like ours builds foot muscle strength as much as doing a foot exercise program. And she said you should get the same benefits from Xero shoes as the shoe that she used in the study. We didn't have a shoe for her at the time. But yeah, this is not rocket science. We know feet are our foundation, but we've been told for the last 50 years that they're somehow broken, that they somehow don't work naturally, that it's somehow they need support, they need padding, they need all these things. That it's sort of interesting if you go to any place that, I was going to say third world countries, but I'm going to say any place that doesn't have indoor plumbing, where people spend more time in bare feet, they don't have these problems. It's just not an issue. They don't have the problems that people who are wearing modern shoes do. And Dr. Irene Davis made a comment to me once. She said, if we just got kids wearing shoes that let their feet do what's natural, in 20 years, we wouldn't be treating adults for the billions of dollars of problems that they currently have. And, oh, sorry, last thought that just reminded me of. If modern shoes are so good, as people think they are, because that's what they've been told, then why is there a multi-billion-dollar industry for products to add to your shoes to make them better? Orthotics and lifts and cushioning and all this extra stuff. The shoe companies know what that is. They could build that into the shoe if it worked, but they don't, because it doesn't work the way people think. And for anyone who's in orthotics, what I can tell you is they were not developed to be worn full time. They were developed basically to act like a cast for your foot while your foot was healing from some injury or surgery. The same way, if you get whiplash, you don't expect to wear a neck brace for the rest of your life. You wear it to relax things while you recover, while you get some mobility and strength back and recover. That's what orthotics were designed for. But once doctors and chiropractors and podiatrists realized they can make an extra $500 to $1,500 a year from their clients, guess what happened? It became a full-time thing. You're supposed to wear them. And again, when you support a joint, it gets weaker over time. How can that be good?
Yeah, it's that. There's I guess this is maybe a bit how would you say, conspiratorial, but like what is it? A patient cured is a customer lost, or something along those lines.
Well, that may, that definitely has a nice conspiratorial ring, but here's the thing that is not a fake conspiracy, if you will. The big shoe companies know what I just said. They know it's true. They've said, we have a friend, very wealthy investor, who reached out to a number of people that he knew who were at senior levels in major companies when we were trying to raise some capital a few years ago. And they said straight to his face, oh yeah, this natural movement thing is real. We just can't do it though, because if we did, it would be admitting we've been lying for 50 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important thing, that a conspiracy doesn't mean it's like wrong. It just means it goes against the mainstream narrative. So it
could be wrong. It could be wrong too.
Definitely can be wrong.
I would argue that you and I are probably on the same page about whether the Earth is a globe or a flat disk.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, by the way, I'm leaning towards globe. I'm not sure about you.
Yeah. So how do you think this is how we've ended up in this situation then? Like, why 50 years of lying?
Oh, wow. It's a great story. So good question. So way back when, in the early days of Nike, Bill Bowerman was sharing a building with some orthopedic podiatrists, maybe sports podiatrists, I can't remember. And he went to them one day and said, I'm getting a bunch of new runners who are getting Achilles tendonitis. What do you recommend? And they said, well, clearly their Achilles tendons have shortened from wearing higher heel dress shoes. So put a wedge of foam in there to accommodate their shortened Achilles. So that's where it begins. When you put a wedge of foam in your shoe, in your heel, you end up changing your gait. You end up landing on your heel with your foot out in front of your body, just because basically your natural barefoot gait, you've now put something that gets in the way of that. And so you just bump into that heel thing in front of your body instead of having your heel barely pass over the ground till it lands more underneath you. Well, your heel is a ball, so that's unstable. So then they had to build in motion control, which, by the way, doesn't work because there's no amount of foam that can reduce or really eliminate the amount of force you put on the ground when you land on your heel. If you're a 150-pound runner and you're just a casual runner, you land with about 400 pounds of force, 400 to 500 pounds of force. A sprinter like me, I weigh 150 pounds. I land with about 600 plus pounds of force. No foam can contain that. Okay, so then now you've put yourself on your heel. Your heel's a ball. You need motion control, which doesn't work. When you land with your foot way out in front of your body, by the time your foot comes down to the ground, it's essentially flat when you're trying to engage your arch. So let me use an analogy. Think about doing a biceps curl. If I handed you a really heavy weight with your arm straight, heavy enough, you wouldn't be able to bend it. But if you had your arm bent at 90 degrees and I put that weight in your hand, you could hold it there because you have your arm in a stronger position than when it's extended. Same thing with your feet. Whether you have a high arch or a low arch, doesn't really matter. That's predominantly genetic anyway. But if you engage your arch, whatever height it is, that's a strong position. Flat is a weak position. So again, if you land with your foot flat, you're putting strain on your body when it's in its weakest position. So to fix that, because that can cause things like plantar fasciitis, then they put in arch support so you don't need to use your arch at all. So all of that came from the extension of this one idea, let's put some foam under a heel to deal with this shortened Achilles. Well, here's the punchline. Some number of years later, one of these doctors was at a track meet with a friend of mine who used to work directly with Bill Bowerman at Nike designing footwear and gave them the idea for how to make shoes that let feet do what's natural. They didn't do it. But he says to this doctor, your idea took off because in the footwear world, if some new idea catches on at all, then all the other companies try to copy it because they're afraid they'll never sell another shoe. You can see that now. You go into a running shoe store, every shoe looks the same, big, giant, thick padding. Because 9 years ago, Hoka did that and it caught on. And by now, everyone's doing the same thing. So when Bowerman put a wedge of foam in his shoes and people started responding to that for whatever reason, because they thought it gave them an advantage. Ironically, they thought it gave them an advantage. I just thought of this because some runners that Bowerman made that shoe for were setting new records. But the joke is they were middle distance runners who landed on their midfoot or forefoot. They never touched the heel. It was completely irrelevant. So, but regardless, that idea took off. Like, this is important. All the other shoe companies started copying it. All right. So my friend's at a track meet with one of these doctors, and he says, your idea has become ubiquitous. Everybody's using it. What do you think about that? And the doctor said, yeah, that was the biggest mistake we ever made. We were seeing everything with a prosthetic lens. So we thought this thing needed a prosthetic solution, but we had no evidence for this Achilles shortening idea. And we've seen that it's caused problems ever since. So that's how it began. And I will say this, big shoe companies are brilliant marketers. They tell really simple stories that make people believe what they're saying, even though the stories are patently false. So for example, oh gosh, what's my favorite one? Adidas used an example when they came out with their Boost foam. They took a 2-pound steel ball and dropped it onto some cement, and it barely bounces. Then they drop it off, quote, the other company's foam, which no other company has used for probably 40 years, and it bounced a couple times. Then they dropped the ball and bounced it off their Boost foam, and it bounced like 10 times. The first bounce was about 30% of the height that they dropped it from. Well, I've been teaching physics since I was 14, so I instantly knew that there was a problem here. And what I knew is that in San Francisco, there's a hands-on museum called the Exploratorium. Everything is something you can experiment with. Mm-hmm. And they have an exhibit that's basically this same idea, where they have a steel plate mounted on top of a concrete slab. And then above it, there's a plexiglass plate with a hole in it. You can drop a steel ball through the hole, and it hits the steel plate. Well, how high do you think that steel ball bounces on the first bounce? If we compare that to the Adidas thing, where they bounce the ball off the Boost foam and it comes up about 30%. What does the steel ball do on a steel plate?
Oh, it shouldn't be more, right? But I think it might be.
Throw in a guess. Give me a number. What percent?
Let's go 30 as well.
No, 99.5. So the first bounce hits the plexiglass plate. You can find this on YouTube, by the way, because what makes something elastic, what makes something bounce, elastic is not about stretching. It's about how quickly something comes back to its original shape after being deformed. A steel ball hitting a steel plate is the least amount of deformation. So it's the most energy transfer back into the system. It's not perfect, but it's pretty damn close. Maybe it's not 99.5, maybe it's only 99. Suffice it to say, if you want the maximum rebound, what shoe companies call energy return, you want something hard hitting something hard.
I want steel shoes.
Yeah, that's what it would imply. So there's actually a video that also on YouTube, someone from Adidas being interviewed, and the question is, what's energy return? And he says out loud into a camera, there's really no such thing. There's just how much energy something sucks out of the system. And the thing about the foam, I got to keep referring back to the big companies because they're the ones doing this. Nike in an ad said that with their new big foamy shoe, it gives you the feeling of being propelled forward.
Feeling.
Well, it's true. Exactly. It gives you the feeling. So when I wore a pair, as I was walking, as my heel is coming off the ground, my heel is coming off the ground more slowly than the foam is re-expanding. So it kind of hits me in the back of the heel. So it gave me a feeling, but it didn't do anything because it can't do anything. I'm already off my heel. Tapping my heel does not get me off the ground. There's no energy return there. It's just a feeling. And running at full speed as a sprinter, that foam, it felt like I was running in wet sand, just sucked energy out of my system. And I've been saying this for a decade now. And the Washington Post recently published an article where they looked at the research and they found the exact same thing, is that foam is basically tuned to a particular weight and speed. If you're not that same weight running at that same speed, you're not using the foam the way it's designed, and it will get in the way of your performance. I mean, it always gets in the way, but it gets in the way much, much more. So if you're not a 105-pound Kenyan running a 2-hour and 2-minute marathon, that foam is probably not going to be ideal. Now, some people will say, yeah, but people set personal bests in those shoes. It's like, yeah, people set personal bests in other shoes at the same time. And if you're an elite runner, if someone puts on a shoe and wins a race, you're of course going to be panicked that maybe that shoe is giving them an edge. And then you're going to try that shoe, and all the other elite runners are going to do the same thing. Not all of them, but most of them, just in case. And so people set personal bests all the time. That doesn't mean it's because of the foam. In fact, it could be for one of 3 reasons. First of all, Eliud Kipchoge, the guy who ran the sub-2-hour marathon, he came out a couple of years ago and said, it wasn't the shoes, it was my legs. And if anyone
Yeah.
would know, it's him. Secondly, there's an idea called the central governor theory, came from a guy named Tim Noakes. That's your brain has a big part of it that's always trying to keep you from doing something dangerous, like literally can be physically dangerous. There was a guy who got trapped under a giant slab of rock, and he was able to, even though it was like 2,000 pounds, he was able to push it off his body because his brain was going, you're about to die, turn off the central governor, pushed the thing off, made it down to off the mountain, and then discovered he had ripped like every muscle in his upper body and broken bones because his muscles just pulled so hard, they snapped bones. Well, the central governor is trying to tell you, you're running too fast, you're running too far, you're running, just like slow down.
Like a governor on a car, right?
Exactly. So what distance runners learn to do is basically train the central governor to have a higher threshold, or train themselves to just not listen to that message, or to reframe that message as, oh, that's my signal, I got to push a little harder. So the placebo effect can be very high for things like this. So if someone thinks they're going to run faster, they may reframe that central governor message and then, push a little harder, do a little more. And last but not least, there's a researcher named Jeffrey Gray who suggests that because those shoes are really light, it may be that some runners are increasing their cadence, their steps per minute. If they have the same number of steps per minute, if they have a slightly larger number of steps per minute, but they're running with the same stride length, speed is stride length times steps per minute. So that could make them run a little faster. Or conversely, if their stride frequency, their cadence stays the same, but because those shoes are so tall, their stride length is increased by a tiny amount, that could make them run faster as well. So that's an artificial thing. But we know that it's not the shoes for one really fun reason. Someone did an analysis of Jesse Owens. In the 30s, fastest man in the world, they analyzed his joint angles and joint movements, just the speed he was moving. And he was running on a cinder track, basically sand for all practical purposes, with big, thick spikes. And the analysis showed that if he was on a modern track, he'd be a little slower than Usain Bolt. Even more fun, Jesse Owens gets a lot of attention, but there's a guy who gets no attention, a guy named Delano Merriweather. He's a physician. And when he was a physician, he wasn't even a trained sprinter. He just liked to sprint to burn off steam, is what his daughter told me. He set the world record in the 100-yard dash, still stands to this day, from 1971. Because after he finished that, they switched from yards to meters. So there's never been a professional race in yards after that. Well, he ran a 9 flat. A 9 flat 100 yards translates to about a 9.800 meters. That would make him the 4th fastest man in the world today. And he was running on a cinder track with big, thick spikes. Is it the shoes? Doesn't seem like it. One last one. This is from your neighborhood. When Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile, what happened next?
A bunch of other guys broke it.
Why?
It was a mental barrier, not physical.
That's what everyone says. But I would argue that that's not true. I would argue there was a whole bunch of guys who were really, really close to breaking the 4-minute mile. And then Bannister just happened to be the first one. But isn't it interesting that then when someone did something radically new, it was all mental. But now it's all the shoes, never the mental thing. There's never a story that it's because someone did it and then everyone else followed. It's always about the shoes. Seems a little out of whack. And I would argue 2 things. One, well, I actually did one. I don't think it was a mental thing that suddenly people were able to do it because they believed they could. Although there could be central governor component to that. It's possible. But I guarantee if Bannister had put on a brand new pair of shoes before that run, odds are slim that people would have said, I need to get those shoes. It just wasn't in the mindset of people that shoes were the delimiting factor because they were all basically the same. Thin, flexible, lightweight, molded to your foot.
Yeah. When did you start to realize this? Because you said you studied physics, or then taught physics. When did you come to the realization that this is not right?
Oh boy, when it started so I got back into sprinting 15 years ago when I was 45, and I was getting injured pretty much constantly for the next couple of years. And a friend of mine who's a world champion runner suggested I run barefoot to see what I learned. And now, first of all, when I got back into sprinting, all the coaches and athletes, I said, what shoes do I wear? And they all pointed me to big, thick, padded motion control shoes, whatever, and was getting injured. When I ran barefoot, I discovered I had a form problem that I couldn't feel. My foam got in the way, the heel got in the way, everything got in the way. I just couldn't feel anything. When you're running barefoot, and I'm not telling people to run barefoot, when you run barefoot though, bad form hurts, good form feels fun. And so that first barefoot run, I was having so much fun playing with my form, increasing my cadence, decreasing my cadence, running it faster, running slower with the same cadence or decreased or increased. And then I ended up with a big blister on the ball of my left foot at the end of a 5-kilometer run, which was way more than I'd ever run in my entire life. But I was so entranced by the feeling, I didn't know how far we were going. And we were running on roads and tracks and grass and rocks and wooden bridges. I mean, you name it. Well, many people would say, oh, this doesn't work because I got a blister. For some reason, I thought, hey, how come my right foot's okay? And on my second run, which is a week later, I thought, if I can find a way to run that isn't hurting what is still a gaping hole on the ball of my left foot, then I'm probably not doing the thing that caused the gaping hole. At the 9-minute and 30-second mark, something changed and everything got faster, easier, lighter, fun. And what changed is that I stopped overstriding, trying to put my foot out in front of my body and pointing my toes to land on my toes, because that's what sprinters are supposed to do, is land on the ball of their foot. So, but I was putting the brakes on. Whenever you land with your foot in front of your body, it's like putting the brakes on. And so from that barefoot experience, that changed my gait. My injuries went away. I became a Masters All-American sprinter, et cetera. And that's what started me kind of on the path of looking into this. Also, at that same time, the book Born to Run came out, and it talked about this as well. So putting all that together is what kind of headed me down this path. And I just have a knack for understanding movement patterns. I had just never thought to apply it to running. I taught gymnastics and Tai Chi and yoga and tap dancing and Zen archery and pretty much anything that you could find. If it was physical, I could usually find a way to teach the basics very quickly because I'm just sort of, for whatever reason, good at identifying what those common factors of success look like in physical movement.
Nice. So you said you were 45 when you started to get into this. Were your feet kind of a bit crushed and, like toes all...
My toes weren't all squeezed together because I always wore shoes that were way too long for me, so they were wider than they should have been to fit me properly. And I also spent a lot of my time barefoot. I went to Asia in 1989, and I got used to taking off my shoes to go indoors. And from that, I haven't worn a pair of shoes indoors ever since. And I would go barefoot as much as I can, just as I liked it. But I had really, really crazy flat feet, and I had some muscles in my foot that were sort of overused as a result of that. So like my instep, instead of having kind of a curve in, there was like a bump that came out right in front of my heel, because that was a muscle that was getting overused because of my, quote, flat feet. And people were telling me that's just the way it is. You have flat feet, so that's what'll happen. Well, once I started running and spending time either in bare feet or in the sandals that I then made to have that same barefoot-like experience but have a little protection and keep the dirt off my feet, which made my wife very happy, my feet got stronger. And I developed an arch in my foot. And not huge, because again, that's genetic, but that muscle that was sticking out because it was being overused stopped being overused. So my entire foot shape changed. And after, not that long, it was maybe a year later that I was at an event hosted by a world-renowned chiropractor who said to the people that he was teaching, go feel his feet. Pay him $5 if you have to. Just feel them, because you're going to see they're flat, which we've been told is wrong, but they're freakishly strong, which is really the only thing that matters. And so and they've continued to get stronger. Again, the research shows that just walking around in minimalist shoes, barefoot would probably be the same thing, builds foot strength. So wherever you start, and I would argue that mine started out relatively weak. I was still doing gymnastics at that time a little bit. And so from doing gymnastics, my feet weren't totally weak, but not as strong as they obviously could have been.
Was there anything else you implemented to help strengthen your feet apart from just going around barefoot or wearing shoes?
There were a couple exercises that I did just casually. There's a thing called short foot. It's an isometric exercise. You'd stand on the ground, and without trying to like grab with your toes, you try to pull the ball of your first toe, your ball of your foot towards your heel. So it's an isometric thing. It's a very subtle contraction. If you try it, your foot will probably cramp up. It's a sign you're not strong enough to handle that. So, do a little less. Eventually your foot won't cramp and you can pull a little harder. And eventually you can get really strong at doing that. So that all that's doing is practicing aligning the bones. Jumping rope. I actually was a competitive jump roper before I got back into sprinting. So I'm sure that helped a little bit. That's a good thing as well. There's a bunch of exercises. I've got actually an ebook coming out with that exercise program that I mentioned Sarah Ridge compared just walking to. There's another study where they use that exercise program with runners in regular shoes and found that doing the 8-week foot strengthening exercise program reduced the risk of injury by 250% compared to runners who didn't do that same exercise program. So there's simple things you can do, like spreading your toes as far as you can, squeezing them as close and tight as you can, just to get that mobility back. If you look up foot strengthening exercises on YouTube, especially if you do foot strengthening exercise, BYU, Brigham Young University, then you'll find a whole program that people have used.
Sure. I've heard it called toga as well.
Toga, that's right.
Yeah. So
well, let me say something about the toga thing. There's an idea that when the barefoot movement kind of kicked in 2009, 2010, people were trying to make names for themselves and in that world. And there were people who were saying things like, before you run barefoot or walk barefoot, you need to be able to do the following things. And one is be able to independently lift your big toe off the ground and then and my sign's a little out of whack. So, but I can't do it, but I'm an accomplished barefoot runner. So if you can't do it, play with it. Maybe you'll develop the ability to do it. But even still, there's nothing that matches the effort you put in. That's not what, there's nothing that matches the way your body has to work when you're running or even walking. That is, the same as running or walking. So walking barefoot is great. Running barefoot or in something like our shoes it's like you can do those little exercises. It's like doing body weight exercises. You can only do so many push-ups till you kind of max out on how much that's going to improve your strength. But if you've got weight, you can add weight. And even then, you're going to max out at some point. So just doing those body weight things, if you will, the toga, can be helpful. I definitely recommend doing it when you're in the mood, but it doesn't fully prepare you for what'll happen when you start walking and running. And the only thing that prepares you for doing that is doing that. But in the same way, if you go to the gym and you haven't been for a while, you don't just do 10 sets of 10 for whatever exercise you haven't done for 5 years. You do one set with less weight and less reps, see how you feel the next day. When you're feeling fine and recover, add a little weight, add another rep, and you just build up slowly based on the feedback that you're obviously getting. Unfortunately, the feedback from a weight is much easier to identify than the feedback from what happens when you're running or walking. You have to kind of titrate that a little more.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that like any simulation or training is not going to be better than the real thing, because, well, the real thing is the real thing, right?
The real thing is the real thing. You can quote you on that.
Sure, I will do. Okay, so you think the main reason barefoot shoes aren't more mainstream is because they don't want to be exposed for lying, basically?
Well, what happened, it's two things. One is from the shoe company side. They, in 2009, early 2010, when the barefoot boom started to happen, the shoe companies, the first thing they did was they said, don't run barefoot. You're going to... By the end of 2010, they all had shoes that they were putting out that they were calling barefoot or minimalist. Research from Irene Davis showed that they were not close, or she calls them partial minimalist. I accused her of being politically correct and said, if you weren't being politically correct, would you call them fake minimalist? And she said, yeah. And the problem with them, some were just still too narrow, either in the midfoot or the toe. So Merrill used to send me their shoes, the minimalist shoes they were making. And I said, I can't get these on my feet. They're too narrow in the instep. They have too much built-in arch support, and it's really unpleasant. And if you keep sending them to me, I'm just going to sell them on eBay. And that's what they did, and that's what I did. But the other reason is they had too much cushioning. And the issue again with cushioning is that what the whole idea, it's not about footwear, it's about form, is what should have said at the beginning of this. But your footwear informs your form. And again, if you have a bunch of cushioning, you can't feel the feedback the ground is giving you, which might lead you to changing your form. Again, running barefoot feels great when you do it right, feels bad when it hurts. And if you do that, not to suffer, but to learn something, your brain eventually figures out how to stop doing the unpleasant part. That's what happened to me. My left foot was learning from my right foot when I went on that second barefoot run. In fact, I was just paying attention to my right foot going, what's my right leg doing that my left leg's not doing? And then one day, 9 minutes and 31 seconds later, my brain figured it out and made my left leg do the same thing my right leg was doing. So, but when you have that cushioning, you're just not getting that feedback. And so the partial minimalist shoes didn't fit as well, not foot shaped enough. And some of them still had heel lift, messes with your posture, and most had enough cushioning that you weren't getting the feedback you needed to naturally adopt a more natural gait. So that's one reason. So they came out with those partial minimalist shoes. Within a couple of years, they stopped selling them because they couldn't tell two stories. Cushioning is great, not cushioning is great. Couldn't do that. But the bigger thing is that, you tell a lie often enough and people believe it. And when enough people believe it for long enough, it becomes common knowledge. And so this idea that your feet are somehow not up to supporting your body has become, and you need arch support and motion control and padded shoes and elevated heels. And I don't know about the pointy toe box. There's no reason for that. But the shoe companies don't need to tell that story anymore. Everyone believes it. There's an industry, orthotics and insoles, et cetera, that supports this, pun intended, supports this idea. There's an entire ecosystem keeping this belief alive that you can't let your body do what's natural. It's ludicrous. It's completely absurd. But one thing that we have all learned in the last few years is when someone believes something that isn't true, you can't just tell them, hey, that's not true. They will fight tooth and nail to hold on to that belief. And I don't mean them as some, mysterious they, some evil other part of humanity. We all do this. This is what we're wired to do. We land on a belief and we will want to hold on to it because it's not personal. It's not a psychological problem. It's the way we're made. We evolved to come to a snap decision that could literally mean life and death. And even if it was wrong, it could often keep you alive. And so we learned to lock on to certain patterns. In fact, it's not just us. I just remember this. Pigeons do the same thing. It's a it's a hysterical study to look at. They took pigeons and they put them in a little box where they could peck on a thing and they would get fed. And so they would peck, get fed, peck, get fed, peck, get fed, until they learned pecking on this thing gave them a little pellet. Well, then what the experimenters would do is when they would peck on the little button, they would randomly give them a pellet or not. And what would happen is you could almost see the pigeons kind of think like, oh, that's weird. I didn't get it. Oh, I just did. Wait, what did I do differently this time? Oh, yeah, I spun around in a circle before I pecked on it. Must be because of the spinning around in a circle. So they'd spin around in a circle every time before they pecked the button. But it was still completely random whether they got fed. And so the next time they got fed, it's like, wait, I spun around in a circle. What else did I do? Oh, I went back and forth and then spun around in a circle. And eventually, these pigeons will land on a little pigeon dance that has no more than 7 moves typically. And they will do that dance forever, even if you, again, either randomly or continually start feeding them whenever they peck. It's just locked in. They've landed on a belief and they just can't get rid of it. We do the same thing.
Yeah, I think there's another study, I think it was with mice or rats, and they used, I think it was an illicit, stimulant. And yeah, they found when they randomized it, when they pressed this thing, they actually pressed it more because there's that element of like excitement and
yes, intermittent reinforcement is the strongest way to lock in a habit. It's why going to Vegas does what it does. You get there's 2 parts of in your brain. You have a piece of your brain that one half responds to repeating stimuli, and the other half responds to non-repeating stimuli. So random or rare events. So when you combine that into something intermittent, both of those parts are firing at their maximum. And that's when we lock in a belief.
It's the same way I think TikTok works. You're like scrolling, am I going to get something cool next? You don't know.
Yeah. And then you do. And then eventually it's just, it's like the cocaine mice. Because the other thing with the mice that were getting either cocaine or stimulus directly to their hypothalamus, they would press that lever until they starved to death.
Yeah. Watch out for TikTok, guys.
You'll starve to death like a mouse.
Yeah. With you saying how people kind of latch onto a belief, and even if it's not true, that it might keep getting reinforced. Dr. Ken Berry calls it like the echo of the lie. So even if something has been disproved, people are still like slamming on this, like this is true, and no one's even saying that anymore, like the official people. No.
Look, I have a friend. This is going to sound funny. He technically is very, very smart. There's many indications that this guy is, genius level smart. And that's the important word, and he believes the earth could be flat. Could be. Not positive, he isn't, but, all the data, according to him, totally makes sense. I sat down with him and a mutual friend who was the head of a science museum, the education department of a science museum. And we tried to explain to him, that if you have a chair that's held up with 4 legs, and you get rid of any one of those legs and it becomes unstable and falls down, it fell down because the rest of them are irrelevant. If you just pull one leg out and it doesn't work as a tripod, then the whole argument falls apart. If you have 10 arguments and any one of them falls apart, the whole thing falls apart. But we went through all of his 10 arguments and showed him how each one of them fell apart. And he didn't disagree with us. And he still believes the earth could be flat. I've offered to send him down to the tip of South America, where you can see if the sun is moving in the way that the flat earth people say it should. And he will see with his own eyes that that's not what happens. And I guarantee he would still find a way to believe that the earth is still flat.
Well, I heard what one guy said was, if you try, I mean, I've never tried, but like, this was an average like kind of guy. He hadn't done research, but he said if he had an argument with the flat earther, he'd probably lose because they'd actually done all the research and built this evidence that they believe they're right.
Well, there's also a funny thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect. It was developed by Dunning-Kruger, or named by Dunning-Kruger, which is basically the less somebody knows about some topic, the more they're convinced that their opinion is correct.
Yeah, and then as their time in the field increases, they begin to realize they don't know, and then they begin to know what they don't know, and then eventually over time they get back up to the same confidence level. Yeah.
Yeah.
Give the full explanation. Yeah, Earth could be flat.
It could be, but it ain't.
What does like?
Well, you know what? It actually even couldn't be. I mean, just because of just back to physics, there's just no way, because of how gravity works as things get, anyway. Suffice it to say, it's just not possible.
What does like a normal day in your look like? A normal day in your life look like nowadays?
Oh, yeah. Roll out of bed, go to the bathroom, walk the dog, have some breakfast, get in the hot tub, do the crossword puzzle, the Sudoku, and the Ken puzzles that are in the newspaper, get out of the hot tub, put on some clothes, get to work, and then that gets me here around between 8 and 9. Then I'm usually doing things here till 6 or 7, go home, cook happily. My wife has walked the dog in the interim, make some dinner, crash with the dog and the wife on the couch in front of the TV, turn off my brain for a couple of hours, sometimes do a little more work before I go to bed, and repeat. That's 5.5 days of the week. And then on the weekend, I typically fall over for 2 hours in the afternoon on Saturday or Sunday. I am overcome by a nap, and I have brunch with some friends just to hang out and see human beings. And I hit the track. Actually, in that weekly time, my home gym is right next to where we have our TV. So on the way in and out, I just do random things, Nordic hamstring curls. I do a lot of glute and hamstring exercises. And then enough like pull-ups and bench presses just to satisfy my vanity. And then on the weekend, I get a good track workout in. In the summer, I can get another workout in the middle of the week. And Sunday night, I make homemade pizza, and that's my week.
Awesome. Yeah, Nordic hamstring curls. That's a great exercise.
Can you do it?
Somewhat. We're getting there. I don't know about fully, but no, not yet.
Well, so I'll tell you a story about my being able to do it. It won't necessarily apply to you in the same way because you're much younger than I am, but maybe there's something in it. So I'd been trying it for years, and I would do like a set of 8 as much as I could. You know, I'd like go as far as I could till I fell down and just push myself back up and repeat. I started doing instead 5 sets of 5 with about 2 to 3 minutes rest in between each set. And the first set of 5, you know, the first 2 I'd get down as far as I could, and the last, 3 I'd practically fall. And then the second set, be about the same. The third set I'd get 1 in before I'd be falling. The last set I'd practically be falling. But the biggest thing that I did is I only did 1 set per week, or one of those 5x5s per week. So I gave myself way more recovery time than I'd ever given myself before. And within a month, the first set I could do 5 all the way down. By the last set, I was doing 3 all the way down, and then just 2 where I was falling. And then after another month, I was go down, up, down, up, down, up for a set of 5. And my last set, I just couldn't get up for the 5, but I could get all the way down controlled for 5. So the key is the right amount of stimulus with the right amount of recovery. And you may have to experiment, but many people try to do either too much or too little. So play with that. Maybe it's because you're much younger, you can probably recover faster. Maybe doing that twice a week could be a good place to start, and see if you start progressing that way. And if you do, that'll give you a guideline of where to experiment next.
There's also, like, I know some people try and do it all the way down with like a straight body from
no hip bend.
And then I've seen some people bend a bit at the hips before they get to doing it straight, because then they can go all the way up and down.
I play with both. To go up, down, up, down, up, down, I have enough of a hip bend so that when my chest has hit the ground, my thighs are at about a 30-degree angle off the ground. So I'm still getting pretty far, but if I straighten my body entirely, so there's no hip bend, then it's hard for me to get back up. And if you watch people like Ben Patrick, the knees over toes guy, he's got a little hip bend in there. In fact, he said to me, as long as your thighs are 45 degrees or better when you hit the ground, then that's all I care about. But for the fun of it, because if you think about your hamstring, it's attached both into your hip and into your lower leg, right behind your knee, but not above your knee, below your knee. So when your body is totally straight, you're putting strain on both ends of that pulley, if you will, and it just really accentuates how hard it is. When you have that little hip bend, you're just taking a little bit of force, or a little bit of strain off that top end, and it's put more on the bottom end. And that's actually where, if you look at running injuries in particular, sprinting injuries in particular, it tends to be the lower part of the hamstring. So that's why for sprinting, they're less concerned about doing it totally straight than working on the bottom aspect of the hamstring.
Yeah, that makes sense actually. But that lights your hamstrings up like anything, like nothing else.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah. All right.
What's funny? What lights my hamstrings up more than doing that is doing when I do a day of nothing but starts. When I'm doing starts out of the blocks, so it's pushing out of the blocks and 10 steps. And if I do that 5 times, the next day my hamstrings are toast. But Nordic hamstring curls the next day, it's like, I did Nordic hamstring curls, no big deal.
Yeah. So yeah, can you talk more about that sprinting you're doing? Do you wear? Is it barefoot? Do you ever do barefoot sprinting? Or?
I do most of my warm-ups and drills in bare feet, usually on the infield, unless it's too wet or too hot or too cold. And then I'll put on our Speed Force shoe, which is I'll either wear one of our sandals, depending on my mood and the temperature, or the Speed Force, which is just 4.5 millimeters of rubber between me and the ground. So I will, when I'm then working on actually being on the track and actually running, I'm in that shoe, because a track surface is very abrasive, and my top speed is about 21 miles an hour. And so to be hitting the track with that amount of force, that's problematic. It can rip your feet up pretty bad. So I need a little protection. If it was a really flat, like I sprinted inside a grocery store where the floor is really flat and smooth, but strangely grippy as well, just a little bit. And that feels great. It's super, super fun. But on a track, you need something for when you're going full speed. And so I both train and compete in our Speed Force shoe.
Okay. Yeah, if I'm ever in the US and I see someone sprinting around a grocery store, I'll know who it is.
It'll be me. It'll definitely be me. You know, we're thinking of doing a TikTok challenge that has to do with going into a grocery store in bare feet, just doing your entire shopping in bare feet. Because it's legal, but so I was in one grocery store. They said, you can't be in here in bare feet. I said, why? They said, it's a health issue. I said, what do you mean? They said, well, the health department says you can't do it. I said, that's not true, actually. Oh, well, it's about sanitation. I said, I'm really not worried about my feet getting dirty. Is that what you meant? They went, well, no. I said, so you're going to tell me my feet are dirtier than someone who's walked in here in boots where they stepped in dog shit? Well, just don't do it. And then I just make sure that person's not around and I do it again. So it's one of those things that if people do this challenge, the first part of the video is like, what are you thinking? How are you feeling before you do it? Then go in and just, stand in front of the mister where the produce section is if it's a hot day, walk around, see who notices, see what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and then walk out, see what happens. Worst thing that's going to happen is someone's going to ask you to leave, and you'll say, well, let me just finish this, and then I'll do it. That's literally the worst thing that's going to happen.
Sign me up.
It's fun. I just find it really fun to challenge what we believe. And if you believe it's going to be horrible, people are going to get mad at me, people are going to think I'm crazy. Yeah, people that you've never seen before might think you're crazy. People you will never see again might think you're crazy. And that means what?
Exactly, yeah. So me and some of my guys did this thing called Discomfort December, and each day, like, instead of an advent calendar, someone came up with like a challenge.
Oh my God, I love that. Give me some of the challenges.
We had singing in public. What else?
Wait, in public, like randomly, or going to a karaoke bar?
Like a public area and just start singing. What else was there? Acting like an NPC. Do you know what an NPC is from like a video game? A non-player character.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
How do you act like an NPC?
Just be a bit clueless and start like waving and hello. There were some like food ones which were like eat a raw onion. That was pretty grim.
Oh God, yeah.
But the social ones were pretty funny. One was take like a cold dip in like a river or lake. And that was in December, so that's cold in the UK.
So for many, many years in Colorado, in Boulder, they would at the Polar Bear Club on January 1st, we would chip away the ice and jump in the reservoir. I did that for 17 years. It was, it's a blast.
Yeah, sounds great.
Well, so especially the social ones, what did you discover or what surprised you most once you had finished doing those?
Yeah, I think like all of us said, like after you'd done it, it was like relieving almost, but then after the challenge it was kind of like, well, yeah, people, it really doesn't matter, like, and I think that's good just to have as a skill generally for even any time you want to start something new, really.
Here, I can tell you what most people think about you most of the time. Nothing. They're not thinking about you.
Yeah.
And we don't know that, even though if we think about it, we are not thinking about them either. We're always thinking about us. So, but we just, for some reason, think that everyone else is thinking about us. And again, there's an evolutionary reason for that too. But suffice it to say, if we put it to the test, especially now, we find, yeah, not so much, not really a big deal. And even if someone does, what's the worst thing they're going to say? You're crazy. And you could say, I know, I feel like that too.
Yeah.
We agree. Where's the problem?
There's this guy I follow called Zach Pogrob, who owns a page called Behavior Hack on Instagram, and he had one of a quote. I don't know if it's his quote, but it was, there's two mistakes to avoid making: caring what they think and thinking that they care.
Oh, nice.
Because, like you said, a lot of people might think, oh, these people think about me all the time. Like, no, they'll look at you for like 10 seconds. What is he doing? And then just go home and forget.
Yeah, they'll either forget or they have a great story. Either way is fine.
Exactly. Yeah.
I had a weird thing. To make a very long story very short, someone ended up getting my wallet in an airport, and when I realized it was missing and I went looking for it, I found it in a trash can, and the money was gone. And I had about $500 in my wallet at that time because I was traveling for business and knew I was going to need cash. And it only took me about a half an hour till my thinking was, there's someone who's going to have a really good day.
Yeah. I mean, you can reframe almost any situation to be more positive, for real. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. And you don't have to, and it's not even reframing it to talk yourself out of something. It's just finding that there's another frame. And so I wasn't trying to talk myself out of being upset. I just realized, for whatever reason, it occurred to me to think about the other person. And it's like, I hope that guy's married, or I hope, first of all, I thought it was a guy. I don't know why. Well, let's pretend it was a guy. I hope he's married or is dating someone that he really cares about. Because if so, they're going to have an amazing date within the next 5 days.
Yes, that's great. That's great that you do that. I think a lot of people could benefit if they could do that more. Can you talk a bit about like Shark Tank? So you declined this deal from Kevin O'Leary. Did you just think this is way too high?
Yeah, we were offering 8% of the company. I actually came back and offered 10% of the company for that $400,000. And he wanted 50% of the company, which would have given us a valuation below the amount of money we were going to make that year. So I knew that was just a non-starter. And I think I don't know that he thought he was making a serious offer. I think he thought he was just making good television. And if I was dumb enough to say yes, he knew he was going to get a great deal. So it was one of those, like, I'll throw this out there, and either, we'll negotiate and I'll get a great deal, or it'll still be good television. And I'm grateful either way. I mean, when I went from 8% to 10%, that's a 20% decrease. There's a big difference. It's between a $5 million valuation and a $4 million valuation. So that's huge. If he thought we were going to go to, from his 50% to 40% or 25%, I mean, ironically, we would have gone to 25%, just not in one jump. I wouldn't have gone from 8 to 25. But if I said 8 and he said 30, or if I said 10 and he said 30, I would have said 12 and a half. And he would have said 30. And I would have said, oh, well. I mean, I don't think we would, to get from 8 to 50 to find anything in between, highly unlikely. But I knew what our valuation was. And I was willing to just play with it and see where he was willing to go, because no harm, no foul.
Yeah, it's a good negotiation strategies there. Don't move too quick.
Well, what you do, here's the way you do it. Actually, if I was smarter, I would have done this. I would have gone from 8 to 12, and from 12 to 13, and from 12 to like 13.1. Because if you make a big jump and then a small jump to a really exacting number, people think, oh, he must have thought that through really clearly in advance. That's probably it. And then they tend to make a giant jump to meet you.
I've not heard that one before. Yeah, that's good.
It's a great strategy. I knew about it, but I really started using it more after I read a book called Never Split the Difference. It's from a former FBI hostage negotiator named Chris Voss.
Yeah.
Brilliant. What they learned is that the best way to negotiate is actually by acting like a Rogerian psychotherapist, where your goal is to understand the other person so well that you can explain their position perhaps better than they can. Then they feel really understood and that you're on the same page as they are. And typically in a hostage negotiation, or even a business negotiation, people are, their motives are not necessarily either what they think or what they've said. But once you're on the same page, then they feel like you're figuring it out together, and they're much more likely to come to understand their motives, and often their motives can be met in some other way than the way you were negotiating. You're talking about money all the time. Like, this is a funny one. I thought about this. If we were negotiating with somebody about our company, there's some very, very large companies that we could talk to. And if they didn't like the amount of money that I was looking for, I would say something like, how about we get free use of your corporate jet once a month? It doesn't cost them anything. They're already writing off the corporate jet. But, that would have some value to me. So you can take things out of, just totally take something out of context for something that would be valuable that doesn't necessarily cost anything.
Yeah, one of my guys is a big fan of that book. Shout out to Corey Bennett Boardman. Yeah. What are your thoughts on these things?
Toe spreaders.
Yes.
For some people, they're really beneficial. When I use them, I don't notice anything because my toes are already pretty widely spread. But I know the research is that they can be beneficial for people who have bunions, or in other ways their toes are really squished together. The idea is not just to wear them, though. Ideally, use them for exercise, like put them on and then try and spread your toes, put them on and try and squeeze your toes. So you can wear them as well, which can just help train some of your muscles to relax a little more, but they can also be used for exercise. So I don't have a lot of personal experience, but I know a lot of people who have, who swear by them.
Yeah, I think they've helped me a decent amount. I definitely would say they made a difference, yeah. And then I guess the third piece of the puzzle maybe is like separate toe socks. Have you seen these?
Yeah, I don't wear them because I have Morton's toe, which, just for the fun of doing this, many people think Morton's toe is because your second toe is longer than your first. It's really that your first toe is too short. So it is your second toe is longer than your first, but not because it's magically long. It's that your first toe is magically short. So most toe socks don't fit me because of that. And also, again, some people totally love them. Some people don't. Like the reason that I never wore 5-finger shoes is because they never fit the shape of my foot. Had they fit my foot, I probably would have never started Xero shoes, but they just never did. So it's just a question of fit. And I will tell people, if you wear toe socks, at first it's tricky to get them on. And then over time, some combination of your brain figuring it out and the socks kind of molding to your foot in a little way, it does become very easy and you can slip them on without a problem. But at first, it's definitely a hassle.
Yeah, I also got them. I got the whole stack. What was I going to say? That's interesting about the didn't. Oh yes, that was it. So what did you say it was called? Morton's toe.
Morton's toe.
That's where your
second toe is here. I'll hold up my foot. Wait, hold on. Foot. Here we go. Second toe is taller than my first.
Oh, I see. So yeah, the toe next to the big toe, and that's not where it overlaps though. I thought it was. There's another thing where they overlap, right?
Yeah, that's a different thing. There's a name for that too. Well, it's hallux valgus is if your big toe is pushed in. And they can overlap, but not necessarily. It could just be a bunion and they're kind of pushing against each other. So that's the valgus is just that movement that shouldn't be there, that internal movement.
Yeah. One thing I found while doing research for my video, which if anyone wants to check out, giving a quick plug here, is modern shoes are killing your feet. Just type that in and it will come up. But it was interesting on the NHS website, which is the healthcare company for the UK. It said like bunions are like genetic or caused by, like there's no fix for them apart from surgery. And then I found somewhere else it's saying that bunions are much rarer, almost non-existent in countries which do not have modern footwear. So I was like,
Yep. They're much more common in women than men by a significant percentage, and much more common in women who wear high heels than women who don't. And I mean, this is not rocket science. You squeeze your toes together, guess what happens? I mean, you're loosening the tendons and ligaments that are keeping your foot from your toe from moving that direction, then it gets stuck in that direction. There's another thing that happens that people don't really appreciate is how much of motion is not about what your body can do, but what your brain is telling your body it can or can't do. So there's a body work methodology called Feldenkrais work from a guy named Moshe Feldenkrais, who came from Israel, came to America with a guy named Tom Hanna, who's an American guy, whom I had a couple sessions with, which is really fun. But the premise is that many movement impingements or impairments, like frozen shoulder, I can't lift my arm above here, for example, are not a physiological problem, but your brain having gotten familiar with a certain range of motion. Like maybe you got injured and you couldn't move your arm, and so your brain gets the hint, oh, you can't move your arm past that. And then you can, technically, if someone passively moves it, not a problem. So then why can't you do that?
The governor.
And yeah, it's basically the governor again. And so similar idea back to that point, back to this whole Achilles shortening thing. I watch people running in regular shoes who land on their forefoot, foot underneath their body. They're of great form, and they don't even let the heel of their shoe come and touch the ground. And then they put on a minimalist shoe and go, well, these things hurt my Achilles. Like, no. You trained your Achilles not to be able to move properly. You just need to do things to tell your brain it's safe and you'll be fine. I've seen this happen with Feldenkrais work repeatedly, where in fact it happened with me, where I had a certain movement that I couldn't do after being a gymnast for decades. And Tom Hanna put me in some weird position where he moved my body into the right position and then straightened my body out. So I was now doing something that I thought I couldn't do. And instantly I could feel my brain just lighting up like, oh my God, what a relief. And then I could do that motion for that moment, from that moment forward. It's just like, it just snapped my brain out of a pattern. Our brains are wired to make loops and stay in loops. And sometimes those loops are helpful and sometimes they're not. And it's a weird thing to lay down a new neural pathway.
Well, pattern recognition machines.
Yeah, same thing.
Would say to what you said earlier with these people had shortened Achilles. I forgot to say it at the time, but it's like, why? Maybe the solution shouldn't be like get their feet with this padding. It's just like maybe try and fix the original problem. How about that?
Well, that was in the 70s. That's when Earth shoes came out. That was the premise. Is that was a negative heel, so the heel is below the ball of your foot. And it was a mistaken idea that that's the way we're supposed to be. It's like, hey, when we walk on the sand, you look in the indentation, the heel is heavier than the ball of the foot. That means we're supposed to have our heel underneath the ball of the foot or lower than the ball of the foot. It's a misunderstanding of how what's actually going on. But it did awaken a lot of people to the idea that you could actually move your body differently than what's happening in shoes that elevated your heel.
Yeah.
And a lot of people got a lot of benefit from it.
I think even if you look at like archaeology and like anthropology, it all makes sense. Like a lot of the first shoes were just protection; they weren't support, and even
not even just the first shoes for hundreds of thousands of years. Just something to protect your foot, something to hold it on your foot, and maybe a little bit of insulation depending on where you live. Yeah,
and then even I saw that like the Greeks just like they had shoes, but a lot of them preferred barefoot, and it was only really for fashion, from what I understood. And like you said, with the orthopedics, the beginning to bring this padding in, it's just
humans. We do lots of things for reasons that are not good for us. There's lots of things we eat that we love that are not good for us, but we eat them anyway because we love them. And I mean, there's so many things that we've done in the name of attaining status and getting laid. Lots of incredibly stupid things that are not good for us.
Yeah, I would say there are a lot of answers in the past, and just looking at how we would have been like naturally in the wild or whatever without all this stuff.
A, I completely agree. B, the argument people say is, yeah, but we didn't evolve to run on concrete surfaces for miles and miles. It's like, have you ever been to the places where we evolved? Packed mud is as hard as concrete, and it's got things sticking out of it that you would never want to step on. And more importantly, just because we didn't do that thing when we were evolving doesn't mean we can't do it. We didn't evolve to do double twisting, double backflips. I've done one. We didn't evolve to fly fighter jets. People do it. We didn't evolve to do our taxes. People do it. So it's a naturalistic fallacy, or a variation of a naturalistic fallacy. The naturalistic fallacy is anything natural is better, which is clearly not true. Hemlock is not better than Pringles. But there's another version of the naturalistic fallacy that's just a misunderstanding of what it was actually like back then.
Yeah. Okay. I think we'll wrap up here. I want to respect your time. I really appreciate this. I think you seem such an awesome guy, and I love your shoes.
Well, thank you for the latter, and that's very kind of you for the former.
Yeah. All right. Where should people go if they want to find out more about this?
Well, I'm going to say there are 2.5 places. So you can go to xeroshoes.com, or if you're in the EU, xeroshoes.eu. And if you're in the UK, you've got to wait for, this is now almost the end of March. You've got to wait for anywhere between 2 and 4 weeks. I'm not sure yet. We're going to be launching xeroshoes.uk as an independent website that we manage. It was currently being managed by an independent dealer, but we're redesigning it and taking it over in a few weeks. Oh. And then, of course, on social media at or slash xeroshoes or xeroshoes.eu, wherever you at or slash.
That's XERO, zero.
Thank you. Although if you type in and it accidentally goes xeroshoes.com, it'll still get to us.
Yeah, okay. I'll put some of those links in the show notes.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Pleasure,
Steve.
Owen.
Have a good rest of your day.
You as well.
Goodbye. Live feet first. See ya.
Cheers, man.